The idyllic villages that cling to our coastline. Known for their beauty and serenity.
Oh, it's wonderful to see that sailor.
Now destinations for our leisure. But once they played a vital role in our history.
This is amazing. I'm Ben Robinson, and as an archaeologist, I'm intrigued by our coastal villages because there's always a bigger story behind that idyllic postcard image.
I've come to Botallack in the far west of Cornwall. It's 7 miles from the town of Penzance and sits on the Atlantic Ocean. A quiet village now, it was once at the heart of a landscape torn apart by a frenzy of tin and copper mining, stretching out deep under the sea.
To cut this by hand, they would have advanced about a foot a week.
And look at that, it goes on and on and on.
There are hidden clues to the villagers' tough working lives.
I've just noticed there's a thin piece of wood, and there's one on this side as well.
That's the coffin hatch.
And I'll discover the part villagers here played in fulfilling global demand for a deadly poison.
Men would go in there and they would hack the deposit off the walls.
So I'm gouging out all this horrible material, and what have I got to protect myself? There's a fascinating story to this village by the sea.
Approaching from the Atlantic Ocean, the first thing you see are the remains of Botallack's mining past.
We've just sped round the southwest tip of England, the Lizard Peninsula, Land's End in Cornwall. And people come to this rugged, spectacular coastline today for all sorts of thrills and spills. But in times gone past, they came here for an entirely different kind of adventure. There were fortunes to be won and lost from the minerals in those cliffs. Commercial enterprises came and didn't just extract copper and tin, but something else extremely valuable, but deadly. And I'm here to find out how this industry shaped the lives of the villagers just beyond those cliffs.
The village of Botallack is in the parish of St Just. Slightly inland, the settlement grew up from a small farming hamlet, and you can still find clues to its early agricultural past.
Just walking down the main street, taking in a few of the older buildings, and this is a nice old inn. Look at the details on it here, those lintels carved with fake keystones. It's an 18th century building and a building of some importance in the village. And just across the road, there's something else here. You can see a blocked entrance, a wide door for animals, for produce, for carts to go in and out of. It's been converted into a house now, but just round the corner, I noticed steps leading up to a first floor entrance, so maybe a hayloft or a granary above, animals, implements, produce below. It's a barn, it's agricultural. And I'm seeing everywhere these quite small cottages in terraces. And what I've noticed is a lot of these terraces are not facing the main street. They're turned around so the gables are facing the street. Maybe there was a lot of noise and traffic going up and down, horses and carts, and perhaps there was room in here for little gardens to grow vegetables in.
These cottages were built to house workers for a new and very profitable business that reshaped Botallack.
In the 19th century, as the mining industry began to boom, more labour was needed. And tiny villages and hamlets like this had to accommodate that labour. They had to build and grow. They had to expand with the industry.
Britain's Industrial Revolution had arrived. Tin was in demand for food storage, and it mixed with copper to make bronze that made machine bearings and many other things. Copper was used for coinage and telegraph cables. And as prices rose, there were fortunes to be made from the mineral-rich landscape here. By the 1860s, Botallack mines were some of the most prolific mines in West Cornwall.
In its lifetime, it produced 15,000 tonnes of tin, 20,000 tonnes of copper. And in that process, it transformed the landscape around the village. Now, we've got standing remains today, but even this is just a fragment of the extent of this enterprise. And these remains are memories in the landscape, memories of the industry, but also people's working lives.
Botallack resident and archaeologist Adam Sharpe has studied the local mining industry.
So, I mean, this is just incredible, a spectacular spot. But you haven't brought me here just to admire the beauty of it. There's a specific purpose to this landscape.
Absolutely. This is the epicentre of the St Just mining district. It was a powerhouse of industry. Millions and millions and millions of pounds worth of copper and tin that came out from this area. And they're building things everywhere. They're investing like crazy. Here, the mine at its height employs 500 people. It's something like 90% of all the people who lived in the neighbouring settlement worked down here.
And important innovation was taking place right here.
Yeah, they were having problems basically because, as we can see, the mine is right on the edge of the cliffs and the shafts go vertically down. But the trouble is that the workings then go way out under the sea. And when the men went to work, they had to climb down up to 500 metres of ladders and then 500 metres and more out under the sea. And it was taking up a third of the time of their work shifts. So it was very, very inefficient. So between 1858 and 1862 or thereabouts, the management thought, good idea. We'll sink a diagonal shaft down from here out under the sea. And then the men can just ride down in trams and we can bring the ore back up from underground in the same trams.
But this is overturning centuries of sinking shafts vertically down to hit a seam and then fan out.
Yeah, it was very expensive. It was very labour intensive, so it was a brave thing to do.
Did it work?
It worked for 10 years, which was pretty good for a mine. Okay. You know, mines opened and shut on a regular basis, and if you got 10 years out of an area of the mine, you were doing pretty well.
There are more than 30 miles of disused mining tunnels or adits underneath the ground here. And although most of them are flooded and dangerous to enter, a few are still accessible with an experienced guide.
OK, let's go.
I want to get a feel for what it was like to be a Botallack miner working here every day.
Oh, we've got to watch our step here, haven't we?
Yes, it's a bit uneven underfoot in places.
Whoa.
It starts out big, but it gets small.
Oh, and water.
Yeah, it's the miner's worst enemy.
This is very cramped now.
It is, yeah. This is fairly average size for these early tunnels.
Average size?
Yeah, they do become smaller than this.
This is, pretty horrendous. It's getting very, very dark. The water's getting deeper. It's going to overtop me wellies pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I can't get much further.
No, and I've got very wet trousers.
Oh no! Look at that. It goes on and on and on, but it's too narrow, the water's too deep. And this is not seawater, this is water dripping from the fields and above, permeating down through the rocks.
Well, that's right. It's just making its way down through cracks and gradually building up and building up.
Yeah. I'm just getting a sense of how difficult it was to work in this environment. And this is just the journey to work. I'm not near the working seam, am I?
No. And if you imagine to cut this by hand, as it would have been, they would have advanced about a foot a week.
A foot a week. So we're looking at many, many, many weeks worth of work there just to get beyond that point. We've not even hit the major tin seams.
No.
I can't think of many worse working environments, to be honest.
Time to go back out, I think.
Come on.
I've only ventured into a fraction of the maze of tunnels hidden under Botallack's coast. But for the local miners whose livelihoods depended on braving the shafts that stretch 500 metres down and 800 metres beyond the cliffs, it wasn't just uncomfortable, it was also dangerous.
I'm trying to imagine what it would be like working in deep mines well below those waves. It must have been horrific. And in fact, there's one account by a miner that says, in stormy weather, the thundering of the sea and the concussion caused by heavy waves was so terrific that frightened workmen would fly from the spot, thinking that the sea was going to break into the mines. Unfortunately, disasters were all too common, and I've got a death certificate here of Michael Nicholas, who died on the 18th of April 1863 at Botallack mine. He's 40 years old, and it says he died of injuries from being precipitated into a shaft. And sadly, he was far from the only miner that didn't return back to the village after a day's shift.
In spite of the risks, the villagers had no choice but to embrace this explosion of industry. And as mining took hold, the parish's population grew from 2,700 in 1801 to nearly 13,000 60 years later.
The miners had to have somewhere to live, so housing developments such as these cottages behind me were constructed for them.
Cresswell Terrace is a perfect example of new housing built for that growing workforce.
Ah, well, these are quite neat cottages. Look at that roughly coursed granite blocks there. And the roofline on these suggests that they might have been built at the same time. They share this same common roofline. Others are stepping down the slope or perhaps built at different times. And there are subtle variations in design. And that suggests to me that this terrace is growing as the population expands.
This cottage dates from around 1830, and I've been invited to take a glimpse inside.
Thanks. Wow. Janet, I've noticed massive, thick granite walls, and that looks like the original rear wall.
It is.
I can almost touch either side. It's a very compact space, isn't it? How many people do you think were living in here?
At least half a dozen, sometimes 10 or more. But the beauty of it is that miners work shifts, So you had a lot of hot bedding. So as the night shift came off, they went to bed, the day shift went to work, and so on.
Hot bedding?
Hot bedding,
That's a
yes.
bit like bunks in a submarine or warship or something like that, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I guess it is.
I've just noticed this type of wood in this room.
Ah, yes. This comes from the main shaft at Botallack mine. It was stripped out in the 1980s, and we've got it either side of my fireplace as well.
Can I have a look?
Yes, of course.
Wow, this is a big fireplace for quite a small room.
It would have been open fire originally, and then a little bit later in the 19th century, they would have probably installed what's known as the Cornish range or slab. And the slab is like a very mini version of a Rayburn or an Arga.
And I've just noticed on this beam here, there's a batten, there's a thin piece of wood, and there's one on this side as well. And they're only in this short length. They're not across the entire length of the room or even the fire.
Yes, that's the coffin hatch. Unfortunately, one of the things miners died from was lung disease, silicosis. Towards the end, it would be very, very difficult for them to breathe at all.
So if they became unwell, they'd be upstairs, confined to their beds, and then the worst might happen.
Indeed. Those short boards actually are removable.
Yeah.
So they could get coffin up into the bedroom to collect the body and lower it back down. They were also used for moving larger items of furniture up.
So it's a bit like a loft hatch, really.
Yes, very similar to a loft hatch.
And I noticed you've got a couple of artefacts here.
They actually come from Botallack mine. I used to do a lot of exploration in the mines, and I found the candle and also the sole of a miner's boot. Yes. That's shrunk rather a lot since I've owned it, but you can still see all the stitch holes in it.
These are wonderful connections back to the mines, and you live in a house where generations of mine workers would have lived. You've immersed yourself in the history of this area, and you clearly love it.
I certainly do. I have lived here for 30 years, and I've no intention of living anywhere else.
It wasn't just labourers who lived in Botallack. Just up the road, there's something rather grand that's caught my eye.
Oh, this is something a bit different to the cottages in the village. Look at that fine, ornate window on that gable looking out over the landscape, and it's a big window too. And this is the original frontage. Look at that projecting porch there, the grand entrance, and again, more big windows. I'm getting the impression of large, spacious rooms and classical details as well. Look at that, the pediment there. It all feels late Georgian, around 1800, early 19th century. This is the house of someone who's got a bit of wealth, a bit of means, a position in society.
Local resident Paula Nicholls is a descendant of the family that once owned this lavish property.
Paula, what's your connection to this house?
Richard Boyne's, my great-great-great-great-grandfather was born here, and he was the start of the Boyne's mining dynasty.
I mean, it's a prominent house, isn't it?
It is. And from the upstairs windows, you could look out and see the various mines that your family were associated with.
And this was a hub of industry and enterprise, and they would have been surveying their empire.
It would never have been quiet. The mines worked almost continuously. So at night, you would see the lights of the furnaces. It would have been a cacophony of noise and smells and humanity.
So there's an awful lot of responsibility resting on the shoulders of your ancestors, supervising these mines. It's not just the money side. They were responsible for people's lives as well.
They were. We were a family who were very much involved with things socially. So, for instance, Richard Boyne from here was very much a part of the Methodist Church in St Just. Yeah. There wasn't a them and us kind of attitude.
And so when something goes wrong, it affects the whole community.
Yes, And when the Wheal Old's mining disaster happened in 1893, it was a desperately sad situation.
The Wheal Old's mine where the accident happened was run by Paula's ancestor, Richard Boyne. He wanted to add a new tunnel, as many had been abandoned due to flooding. So he drew up the plans and sent his miners down to begin excavating with dynamite. But Richard's plans were inaccurate, and on the 10th of January 1893, tragedy struck.
What actually happened on the day?
Well, the miners applied the explosives where they thought would be safe and that the plans told them that would be safe. And when the dynamite went off, it went into another mine, Adit, full of water. And it flushed the miners, the young boys, down through the mine. The wind that was caused by this huge surge of water extinguished the candles and the lights. And people were desperately trying to get to grass. And to grass meant getting out of the mine.
So you're in the dark, water gushing in, fighting for survival. It must have been terrifying.
Chaotic. From the men who went down that day, 20 men died. Some of them fathers and sons, brothers. That had a devastating effect on the community. It was heartbreaking. The Boynes went into decline and actually became bankrupt. It's a story of loss for everyone. No one wins in this story.
By the late 1800s, mining affected every aspect of village life in Botallack. But this place that had once dominated the world's mineral market had a dramatic change of fortune.
By 1872, tin deposits were being found in far-flung places. Queensland, New South Wales, Tasmania. Tin fever was sweeping Australia. As a consequence, here in Cornwall, tin prices were slumping. Mines were closing.
However, here in Botallack, some entrepreneurs decided to keep their businesses alive by turning their hands to producing a very lucrative but deadly byproduct of tin mining.
Arsenic. And it wasn't too long before this stretch of coast was extracting 50% of the world's supply.
Dr Lucy Santos has studied why this lethal product was so in demand in the late 1800s and early 1900s.
Now, obviously, I've heard about arsenic as a poison from crime thrillers, but it had other uses.
It did. I mean, in the Victorian period especially, you just cannot get away from arsenic in everybody's homes. So in the wallpapers, because arsenic can produce these beautiful green colours. It was also used as fabric dye as well. The fashionable women of the season would go to their fancy balls wearing these bright green dresses.
Oh, I see you're wearing lovely arsenic tonight,
yes.
dear. Yes, oh, you look absolutely splendid.
But it was known that it was toxic at the time. I mean, when you swish around in your fancy green dress, you could be dislodging tiny bits of arsenic that is being inhaled by your partner.
I find this absolutely astounding. So it really is femme fatales all wandering around, coated in arsenic.
Yeah, but it's fashion, it's prestige, it's showing that you can afford the best. They're using it as a status symbol.
And it wasn't just clothing, was it? It was other aspects of appearance.
Well, yes, because arsenic is also in health and beauty products as well. So a small amount of arsenic is considered to be just toxic enough to stimulate the metabolism. What it does is it plumps the face. Arsenic also irritates the capillaries under the skin, so you get this kind of like flush on your cheeks. In Western Europe, the idea that you would have clear, pale skin with a tiny, tiny flush is the gold standard, and arsenic is doing that. And you can find examples of products all over the world that are using arsenic as a primary ingredient.
So something that had just been discarded, a toxic waste, suddenly had found this fantastic new set of uses. It's amazing to me that these mines around us here were meeting that worldwide demand.
Botallack boasts an amazing labyrinth-like structure. It's one of the best surviving examples showing the process through which this valuable but lethal substance was produced. Kingsley Rickard has studied how arsenic was made here.
Kingsley, this is an intriguing place. It looks like catacombs or vaults, but how did they use this area to get the arsenic out of the rock?
Well, at the far end, you have a calciner or an oven, if you like, and they would heat the tin ore, which had arsenic with it, and arsenic sublimes. In other words, it goes from a solid to a gas without going through a liquid stage. So in the heat of the calciner back there, the arsenic would have changed to a gas, and it sort of zigzag, if you like, through these chambers and then over the bridge and into this lot. And the reason for having the length is that you needed to cool the gas down to get the arsenic gas to resublime back to a solid. So it had to go from about 630 degrees down to about 140 odd. And the arsenic is then deposited on the walls, floors and roofs as a dull, dirty grey deposit.
So it's on the walls, it's all in there. What do they do next?
Well, then each of these chambers would have had a door. Men would go in there and they would hack the arsenic off the walls.
So I go through the door, I'm into a chamber that's been heated up, so it's hot, it's sweaty. I'm hacking, gouging out all this horrible material. And what have I got to protect myself?
Well, all you wear is a rag over your mouth to protect yourself from dust. You mustn't inhale arsenic, and arsenic reacts with perspiration, so you wear long sleeves so that you don't get pustules up and down your arm. The very best, that's what you have.
The thought's just occurred, it's really still on these walls.
No, you're quite safe in there.
So they've got this wonder material and they're thinking, right, quid's in, and there's a demand for it.
You're right in that it was the saviour of quite a number of mines, but once we got well into the 20th century, there was controls coming in about the sale and use of arsenic anyway, because it really was lethal stuff. And that demand was gradually reducing, and so a plant like this only lasted for 7 years, and that was the end of it.
By 1881, the mine closures had reduced the parish's population back down to under 9,000. And although Botallack's arsenic work survived until 1914, it produced very little output.
People come to this area today to appreciate its special character, its beauty. And I hope that while they're here, they also reflect on the fact that these romantic, striking ruins are the remnants of a once vast mining industry. This was an industry that took a huge toll on the landscape and on people's lives, but it was a world-beating industry and one driven by Cornish innovation, enterprise and labour. And that's something that this village can be extremely proud of.